Hello, this is Angela with Parkrose Permaculture. It is a beautiful summer evening here in Portland, Oregon. I'm standing in the backyard of my permaculture garden. We are in zone 8B. Now, a while ago, I made a video about building cattle panel trellises for your garden. They are a way to help increase your square footage by adding vertical space upon which you can grow vining food crops. Now for me, I chose to use the one in my front yard to grow goji berries and winter squash. This one here in the backyard, I have pole beans and more winter squash. You can see the cattle panel trellis is kind of obscured by all of this vining greenery and also a few tomato plants. There's one here too. And there's a summer squash right here. My garden tends to be kind of a jumble this time of year. So here you can see a better view of the trellis head on. There's the top of the arch and here is the walkway underneath. Now, I am growing on this trellis a variety called sweetmeat, and it's a particular one called Angela's Oregon sweetmeat, where I save the seeds every year. I hand pollinate and tape the blossoms closed for those individuals for which I'm going to save the seed. And then I know that they will come true every year. So this is a variety that is doing really well in my climate. It's a really tasty winter squash that is a great keeper. So I want to keep cultivating this variety and keep localizing it as an adapted squash for my location here on site in Zone 8B. Now, usually I grow a ton of Burgess buttercup. If you watch my videos, you'll know that I am a sucker for the Burgess buttercup. I think it's the best winter squash, but it's small and it doesn't keep quite as long as the Oregon sweetmeat. So when I grow the Burgess buttercup, I don't use any supports whatsoever because it is a small family-sized or even two-person-sized winter squash. It really doesn't need support when you're growing it up a trellis. But the larger squash varieties, and should you happen to be growing something like a cantaloupe or a watermelon up a trellis, you want to consider giving it extra support. Sometimes it's called a squash bra or a squash sling. And today I'm going to show you how I am supporting my heavier winter squash with a sling. Here you can see growing in amongst a tomato plant an immature Burgess buttercup. Now the mature squash will probably be about that big, and it is growing freely on this vine with nothing constricting or crimping the edge here. So I don't need to support this. Any support it needs, actually, it can get from the edge of this tomato cage. It's just fine on its own. So moving along here, you can see I have 3 sweetmeat squash set on this one trellis, and I have more in the front yard. This is already a fairly big squash. It will be at least twice this big at maturity. And it is very, very heavy when it is fully grown. Squash have a lot of moisture in the flesh. So moving up here and following it to where it's on the trellis, you can see that it's really getting quite an angle to the bend. And what happens is not that the vine itself can't support the weight of the squash, because although squash vines are hollow and can appear somewhat brittle, they have a lot of tensile strength. But what actually happens is, while these tendrils are here trying to additionally support the weight of this squash, I think squash tendrils are absolutely gorgeous. But what ends up happening is this kind of sharp, narrow edge of the trellis, combined with the weight of the squash here, it ends up strangling it, basically. It ends up kind of decapitating itself because the vine gets so compressed from the weight against this sharp point that it will break off. Now, I have grown these. Some years I forget to put a sling on them, and I've had them not break off, but I really want to get the most out of my harvest, so it makes sense to put forth the little extra effort of supporting this squash just in case it ends up being a little bit too much for this angle right here. So a quick note here, I have seen folks ask in gardening groups when they have pumpkins that look like this, what's going on? This is incomplete pollination and this pumpkin won't mature. In fact, sometimes the pumpkins on purpose abort later squash farther down the vine, like this one. This won't mature into a pumpkin because they are trying to self-focus the energy into the ones they've already gotten quite a bit of maturation and investment into. So what you need in order to make your sling for your pumpkins or your melons is you need an old t-shirt, and that's it. I just took one that was really worn out and destined for the rag bin anyway, and that's what I'm going to use. Now, I have seen folks post online about how they use pantyhose, either order ones off Amazon or something, or they might have ones in their closet that they use. And I'd like to caution you against that because nylon decomposes readily under UV light. In the bright sunshine here, it will deteriorate and shed little bits of plastic into your garden. So I don't think it's a great idea. If you have an old bed sheet or ideally an old 100% cotton t-shirt, that's gonna work great because the t-shirt being knit will have a little bit of stretch to it that will support the pumpkin as it grows, but it won't shed plastic into the environment. So first of all, you can use a sleeve like this and just cut the sleeve wide open as I have done. And that's nice for a smaller sling on a smaller squash. Or you can take this as the back off of the t-shirt and you can see really nice and stretchy. It's gonna help support that squash as it grows. So in supporting my squash, I don't actually need to lift it or boost it any. In fact, that can damage it. I just wanna support it right where it's at and make sure it can't sag anymore. So I'm just gonna take it and thread it. Here, I'll show you. Thread the t-shirt through this hole I've made and it will be its own support on the trellis. And then I don't need anything to tie it with. And then I wanna take the other side and I just wanna cradle it right where it's at. Open my t-shirt up, make a nice little hammock. I want to be careful not to damage any of the other vines. Now, if I have to sacrifice a leaf like this one, that's okay. It won't damage the whole squash. You don't want too much tension. You want the squash bra to stretch and support that squash as it grows. So here's my finished supported squash. You can see it's just tied on this end and on this end. I'd encourage you to tie your sling kind of horizontally from where the stem is on the squash. I feel like that gives it the right amount of support without trying to hoist it up, which can damage the vine itself. And this way, it can't sag any further. There's a nice bit of stretch here to support the squash as it inevitably gets wider. But now my squash is protected and there's not gonna be additional strain up here, and I'm not gonna have breakage and I'm not gonna have loss of my fall harvest, because we will want to be enjoying the squash in the winter. I don't grow food in my garden just to enjoy the aesthetics of it. I grow it to eat it. So I want to make sure I get it all the way to harvest. So thank you for watching today. I hope that little tip was helpful for you all. If you've got those old t-shirts in your rag bin, you can go ahead and use them to help support your summer squash, winter squash, or melons that are getting a little big and unwieldy for your trellis. And that way you can ensure your harvest is supported and protected, and you will have a delicious yield of fresh organic produce out of your garden. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and please click subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my Patreon down in the description. Also, check out my brand new sister channel, Parko's House Raw. Thanks.